So this is a really old comic strip that was actually in y'all's textbook years ago, one of the older editions. And I've kept it because it's one of my favorite. So he says, sometimes I wish I'd gone into microbiology. So clearly he's not dealing with microbiology because what don't we see in this picture? We don't see small cells, and what's the most common tool a microbiologist uses? A microscope. You don't see a microscope. Instead, you see giraffes and hippopotamus and elephants, and it's probably an orangutan or a gorilla. That's probably a gorilla, right? I'm not quite sure what this guy is back here. Where would you find all these lovely animals? At the zoo. So he's probably a what? A zoologist, right? Or a veterinarian working for the zoo, right? He could have several titles, but clearly he's dealing with large animals that are typically in a zoo. Microbiologists don't deal with large stuff, right? They live under a microscope for the most part, and then nowadays that encompasses so much more, right? It's not just microorganisms, looking at them under a microscope. Anybody know anything else that we do with microorganisms now? Medicine, vaccines, right? We're talking about even smaller stuff than you can see under a microscope, right? Although they've got really high-powered microscopes now too, right? We can see down to the atomic level, right? But microbiology isn't just, the stuff that makes us sick or the vaccines that we make. Can we use it to solve crimes? Can we use it to change our environment? Bioremediation, right? Can we use it to make things? Absolutely, right? Most of us really enjoy some of the things that microorganisms make, right? Some of us, refrain and only do that on the weekend, but this is New Orleans, right? So when we define microbiology, in that definition, we also have to think of how large the scope is, right? How much it encompasses now. So it's not just about, organisms too small to be seen with our eyes. It has many sub-disciplines and many different little niches and different areas in which microbiology falls under. So although I study for my master's degree immunology, that's a subset a lot of times of microbiology. So sometimes you're referred to as a microbiologist. But then I studied it at the molecular level, right? So I'm talking about DNA and RNA and proteins, right? Right down to that teeny tiny, right? Something you're not seeing again unless you've got one of those high-tech microscopes, which I have to say, it's one of the few microscopes I haven't had the chance to see. Might have to somehow arrange myself a sabbatical one of these summers so I can go do some more microscope work. Make sure you write your name on the pad so that I know you were here today. So bacteriology. So that's a sub-discipline of microbiology that focuses just on what? Bacteria. That one's easy. It's in the name, right? Virology is clearly viruses. Mycology usually tricks some of you guys up, especially those of you guys that have taken anatomy and physiology, because you think myco, you think what? Muscle. But again, this is microbiology class, so it's not muscle. Instead, anyone know? It's fungi. Fungi. Mushrooms, right, which are very large fruiting bodies that some molds make, and yeast, right? And these are the ones we really like, yeah, right? Yeasts, they're the ones that help make the beer and the wine through a process called fermentation, which leads right into food microbiology, right? So a lot of the foods that we eat would not exist if it wasn't for microorganisms, right? They convert what we give them into something else, like alcohol, like yogurt and cheese and a bunch of other fermented foods out there, kimchi, soy sauce. Parasitology, this is a study of what? Parasites. Come on, give me an example of a parasite. Tapeworms, roundworms. Are those microscopic? No, but typically what part of their life cycle is? Now, are they always a worm? What are they before they're a worm? The egg or little larva, and those are microscopic, right? So, if you're a parasitologist, you still are dealing with some phase of microscopy, right? So our resident microbiologist here at Delgado, if you're interested in that, she actually teaches anatomy and physiology, but her background is parasitology. Her and I went to grad school at Southeastern together. Sarah Brock, some of you guys may have had her for anatomy and physiology. Excellent teacher. But her love is actually parasites. So, and in her office, she's got Madagascar hissing cockroaches, if you like that kind of thing. Our resident virologist here is Marian Friedstadt. Maybe some of you guys may have had her for biology class. That's her area of specialty is virology, and she studied the polio virus. And she actually did a sabbatical this summer too, as well, working some more on polio virus. So if you think viruses are super cool, that's your contact person here at Delgado. And then, of course, I'm the immunology lady, right? I promise you don't want to ask me unless you've got time, right? Because I can just keep going. It's my number one love. So environmental microbiology, right? This is a very hot topic nowadays, right? How we affect the environment with microorganisms, how microorganisms affect the environment. And then, of course, forensic microbiology, right? How can we use this to solve crime mysteries, right? And one of my favorite books, especially for a lot of you guys going into nursing and allied health fields, is the book is called Stiff, and it's written by a lady called named Mary Roach. Make sure you sign the pad so that I know you were here today. She writes about what they do with cadavers, and she's an amazing writer. And I was laughing reading this book, right? So you're like, really? You're reading about dead bodies and you were laughing? But she puts humor where it's appropriate, right? So I was on spring break, standing in line to see the Constitution. What else are you going to do but read a book, right? And I laughed out loud, and someone said, what are you reading? I'm like, I don't know if you want to know. It doesn't seem appropriate to be laughing about dead bodies, right? But it really, gave me a really good understanding. And up in Tennessee, they really have a place called the Body Farm, where they literally have left bodies out in the elements to be able to study what happens to the body when it's exposed to the elements under certain conditions. And all kinds of really cool, interesting stuff as it relates to cadavers. So I highly recommend that one. It's a really short book. So microbiology was born as a science, we believe, back in 1674. This is not a history class. I don't expect you to memorize dates. The reason I put the date there is, I don't know about you, but I can't even fathom how long ago that was. It's incredible to me. Anthony von Leeuwenhoek, and there's some debate, right, as to, who did what first and who should be credited with, beginning this whole thing we call microbiology. But he was a really interesting fellow. He was a Dutch drapery merchant, right, so he dealt in fabrics. And he made his own lenses. And he was looking at the fabric because he, of course, wanted to know how good quality it was, right? And the more detail you could see, the better you could determine that quality. But he didn't just stop there, right? He was a very inquisitive individual. He even looked at his own poop. He was the first to characterize Giardia, a parasite that can be found in the intestines of mammals like ourselves. He looked at lake water, right? And he saw probably one of the earlier protozoa and saw them moving around. And because they had movement to them, he believed that there was some type of animal, just a really small animal. So he coined the phrase animalcules, animals referring to, of course, a living organism, and cules referring to small, just like how we say molecules, right? We're referring to something that's small. How do we know he did that? he documented it, right? That's the number one thing as a scientist, right? Is we observe and document. Then we usually go one step further, right? We ask questions, we test these questions, we make conclusions based on those tests. And that's what we typically call the scientific method, right? You do it every day. It's a natural human thing, right? To ask questions, to test questions, to form conclusions, right? When the car doesn't start, you don't just go, oh, well, right? You're like, well, maybe it's the battery. Maybe it's the alternator, right? In my case, I call roadside assistance. And then they start doing all of that, right? But we still do that every day of our lives, right? We ask why, how, what does this mean? What can I do with this information? So yeah, he wrote letters to the Royal Society in London, right? And so we have this documentation even till today, right? So we know that unless he was making it up, right? And what I found recently in reading some new textbooks, the drawings that you see, he didn't even draw himself. He apparently hired an artist. And y'all, they're not that difficult of drawings, like little cock's eye and rods. I was like, okay, that's pretty funny though. But I guess he wanted it to look perfect, sending that to what he considered very important people at the time. So microbes have an enormous impact on our lives, more than we even realize or think about on a daily basis. They have killed more people than we've killed ourselves and more. So they could be quite destructive. But on the flip side, we would not exist on this planet without them. Microorganisms are responsible for producing the oxygen that we breathe. The cyanobacteria and the algae in our oceans are the ones that produce the excess oxygen that make aerobic respiration that we need for life possible. Right? If it wasn't for those microscopic organisms, aerobic respiration, our existence wouldn't happen on this earth. Nitrogen is found in the atmosphere, but we need it in a form in which we can incorporate it into our cells in the form of amino acids, right, to form our proteins. In order to do that, there are microorganisms in the soil that convert that nitrogen into a usable form that then plants can use, and then animals eat the plants, right? And then we, depending on whether you're an omnivore, herbivore, or carnivore, right, or you're going to eat animals, plants, or both. Omnivores eat both plants and animals. I'm an omnivore. I can't do the vegetarian thing. And some people think that they can be vegetarians, herbivores, and you can't. Some people don't have the essential enzymes to convert some of the amino acids found in plants into animal amino acids to build your proteins. So if you are a vegetarian and you haven't cleared that with your doctor, you need to, because you might be putting yourself at risk. You may not be getting the nutrients that you need. So not everyone can be a vegetarian. In general, just eat a wide variety of foods, right? Don't eat the same thing all the time. Fresh fruits and vegetables, though, are your best. Raw. So then, too, we eventually die, right? Plants die, animals die. How is it we get all this back into the cycle of life again? How do we make it back into soil for the plants and then the animals, right? And get this cycle going all over again? Well, it's microorganisms that are the major decomposers in our environment, right? That turn that dead animal, that dead plant back into soil to start the process all over again. So they're vital to our life on this earth, although, right, in this course, we tend to always focus on the bad guys, right? The ones that make us sick. So along that same line of good, right, a lot of the food that we like, fermented foods, this process of them taking that food source that we give them and producing byproducts that we like, right? So milk is the most commonly fermented food item, right? We can make yogurt, cheese, buttermilk. When we say cheese, that list is enormous, right? That conversion would not happen without microorganisms. Fermentation is also what gives rise to alcohol, right? A lot of the fermented foods that we like that are sour, it's from the acid production of fermentation. And even gas gets produced, right? Some of those fermentation processes actually produce carbon dioxide gas and hydrogen gas. It's being used more and more for bioremediation, basically fixing our screw-ups. So there are microorganisms out there that can use some of the toxic chemicals we've used in the past and convert them into things that are no longer harmful to the environment. So PCBs, and I'm not even going to attempt to say the big long chemical name. These were compounds that were used as cooling agents, and they were found to be very harmful and toxic to the environment. And then scientists found that there actually are microorganisms that can degrade this and make it into a usable form. Anything that can be utilized for energy, there's probably a microorganism out there that will break it down. There are microorganisms that will even eat oil, right? The problem with that is that they're microscopic organisms, and we don't have microscopic oil spills, do we? We have gigantic, colossal scale oil spills, right? Oil spills do happen in nature, but usually on a smaller scale, and microorganisms will degrade that, but again, it will take time. At the scale in which we have these types of disasters, microorganisms can't be the only fix. They can help, and they do help, but they're tiny. You need a lot of them and a lot of time, right? Especially if you're talking about a huge, gigantic spill like what happened in the Gulf. DDT, another strange chemical, was used as a pesticide. Again, found to be toxic, but good news, we have microorganisms that are helping us clean up that mess. Even radioactive waste can be converted by microorganisms. Microorganism makes lots of stuff, right? That lovely fermentation of milk and making cheese and yogurt. We can ferment lots of different sugar sources, whether it be grapes or malt or barley or God only knows what, honey, right? You can make mead. So microorganisms can convert that into ethanol, right? Microorganisms do actually produce some chemicals that can be used as pesticides, right? So these are natural pesticides. Most of the vitamins you buy at GNC or any of those types of stores, those vitamins were made by microorganisms and purified into pill form. Microorganisms living in your gut right now make vitamins, dietary amino acids and stuff that you need for survival. So again, they're essential to our life. My favorite example of going one step further with biotechnology is that insulin, which diabetics need because either they don't make it or they don't make it properly. They need it for their glucose regulation in their body. It's a hormone that tells their body basically sugar is here, go ahead and eat it. Right? Without that, the body does not respond to the sugar that's floating in the blood. And that's what your cells live on, is glucose, is sugar. Right? That's what the energy source is for them. If that's not there, they're going to break down other things like fats and amino acids, and when they don't do that in the right proportion, you produce toxic acids, right? And that's when diabetics go into a coma from ketoacidosis. So insulin, they used to have to take from other animals like pigs and horses to give to diabetics. We have engineered bacteria to make insulin, and the nice thing about this is we've told it exactly how to make human insulin. So again, some people would have reactions where their immune system would recognize that it wasn't human insulin, that it came from some other animal. So that was a problem. Right? So now bacteria make insulin, right? Looks just like human insulin. But we haven't stopped there. There's a problem with insulin, right? It's a protein. That's why they have to inject it. It's why they can't take a pill. Because if you were to take it in pill form, your body would just see it as a protein, digest it, when you get to your bloodstream in the form it needs to be in. So, they're working on trying to do an inhalant, right, where you can inhale it and through your mucous membranes get to the bloodstream that way. I don't know where they are on that. But what they have been able to do is most people who are diabetics would have to carry around little ice packs, right? Because proteins are negatively affected by heat, and definitely this protein. And you need it to be in its stable form, its active form. You don't want it to denature. You don't want it to heat up and lose its shape, because then it loses its functionality. What they've been able to do is to tweak that protein in such a way that it's more heat stable. So now they've actually changed the insulin slightly so that it can be kept at room temperature and it won't denature. So they don't have to carry around ice packs anymore. How cool is that? Right? So people freak out sometimes, right? We talk about GMO. What's GMO stand for? Genetically modified organism, right? They've done this to corn extensively, right? And the reasoning behind it is to make sure that the crops will grow better, pesticides won't get to them, but people freak out about that, right? We think, well, what is that doing, having genetically modified that? What effect will that have on us or potentially have on us? And the truth of the matter is I honestly don't know how I feel about it. But I do believe more research needs to be done, and only time is going to give us the true answer on that one, right? But yeah, any corn that you eat, right, unless it says non-GMO, is genetically modified. Your Dorito chips are genetically modified. So, depending on how you feel about that, now you know. Okay, so antibiotics. So I have bacteria can synthesize numerous products, right? And actually I should say microorganisms there, because bacteria aren't the only ones that do it. Yeast are the major ones that produce ethanol. But the reason why I have bacteria there too is that bacteria make antibiotics. That seems kind of strange, right? When do you take antibiotics? To get rid of a bacterial infection. But I just told you bacteria make antibiotics. Well, then we really have to answer the question, what are antibiotics, right? Then to better understand what we're talking about here. So two important definitions to be able to distinguish from one another. Antibiotics and antimicrobials. So anybody want to share what they got for antimicrobial? They kill microbes or prevent them from growing, right? So antibiotics are, which one are we doing? Antimicrobials. Here we go. Antimicrobials include antibiotics and chemically synthesized drugs. So antimicrobial is the big term, right? An antibiotic is a specific type of antimicrobial. All antimicrobials can kill or inhibit microbes, right? So anti means against. Microbial refers to a microorganism. So some examples. Sulfonamide, this is what's sometimes referred to as a sulfa drug. And that is a chemically synthesized drug. Unlike penicillin, most people know that's natural. Where does that come from? Mold, right? The penicillium mold actually makes this substance we know as penicillin. Augmentin is an example of a chemically synthesized drug put with a semi-synthetic antibiotic. So amoxicillin, so notice it says cillin at the end. There's lots of cillins. They're all penicillin to start, and they've been chemically modified. So they're referred to as semi-synthetic because they're half natural and partly modified. So amoxicillin is a modified penicillin. ampicillin, any of those drugs that it starts out with something and then ends in cillin, right? It's ampicillin that's been modified. There's a huge list. I always mispronounce this drug name. I'm not even going to bother trying to say it this morning. I'm not awake enough. This particular drug added to the amoxicillin is what we commonly refer to as augmentin. And if you've ever been bitten by an animal, this is going to be the #1 antibiotic or drug, antimicrobial, they're going to prescribe to you. A lot of bacteria out there have the ability to destroy penicillin-like drugs. They have a special enzyme that allows them to do that. This drug, on the other hand, destroys that enzyme and therefore allows the antibiotic to still work. All right, so it's a 1-2 punch. So what's an antibiotic? An antibiotic is a compound made by a microorganism that kills or inhibits other microorganisms. So what's the key difference here between antimicrobial and an antibiotic?
It kills living, just specifically living instead of just harvesting.
It's made by a microorganism. That's the distinction here. It's made by an organism. So penicillin, #1 on the list. It's made by an organism. It's made by a fungus. And it kills a particular type of bacteria, a group of bacteria we refer to as gram-positive bacteria. So why is the fungus and the bacteria fighting? That's what they're doing, right? He's producing a chemical. Bacteria have been doing chemical warfare, y'all, way before we even thought about it. And technically, we're just stealing their technology, right? When we purify penicillin from mold, we're just stealing their technology. We're using their chemical warfare for our benefit. Why are they fighting with the bacteria, though? Why do we fight? What do we fight over? Control of what? Name one. What are essential things for life? What do you have to live? Water. I heard it. Starts with an F. Food. Place to live, right? Resources that are necessary for life. Land. Food. Water. Oxygen. Light. Whatever it is you need. If somebody else is going to try and get it and you need it, you're going to fight for it, right? Same thing for microorganisms, right? They communicate, their whole world is chemical at a molecular level. They're fighting each other every day for just about the same things we fight over. Whether we want to believe it's other things or not, it really does boil down to the basics. So notice again, amoxicillin, that one is natural to start, but then it's been modified. So a lot of times people say antibiotics, and they're not actually referring to an antibiotic. It may be a drug, right? Like a sulfonamide drug. The true term would be an antimicrobial in that case. But a lot of times we misuse the term antibiotic, right? To be a true antibiotic, it has to be made by a microorganism and affect another microorganism, either by killing or inhibiting it. So there are some bacteria that produce antibiotics that will harm other bacteria. Streptomycin, right? That's an antibiotic produced by the genus of bacteria known as Streptomyces, and it affects other bacteria. In the case of penicillin, it's fungi against bacteria. So again, antibiotics, we don't just take, most of the time they're against bacteria, but we're finding more and more substances that microorganisms produce that will affect other organisms. So fungi fight amongst themselves, bacteria fight amongst themselves. Viruses is a whole nother different ball of wax, right? Because most microbiologists like myself don't actually consider a virus a living organism, right? They're an infectious agent. But again, they can cause disease, right? They can harm us. And so being able to stop them from doing that, or what we commonly refer to as inactivating them, or what you commonly refer to as killing them, because that makes sense, right? Still establishes that goal of stopping us from getting sick. So yeah, there are some antivirals out there. Some of them may be antibiotics made by another microorganism, or they could be chemically synthesized drugs, and in that case the proper term would be antimicrobial. So as we've said, right, although they do really good things, they also do really bad things, right? Microorganisms have killed more people than people have themselves. In the influenza pandemic of 1918, they estimate about 2% of the world's population died. Anywhere from 20 to 100 million people died from this virus. What does pandemic mean? Went around the world, right? It means worldwide. Worldwide epidemic. What does epidemic mean? One person. You know what? We're going to go back to grade school for today. We're going to raise our hand. Who wants to answer? Oh, come on, y'all. Because I asked you to raise your hand. Go for it. Within a particular community? No, well, pandemic refers to community, refers to the community as worldwide. But what's the problem here? So when there's an epidemic, right, so she's thinking, okay, well, they're having an epidemic in a particular community. What does that mean, though? A whole bunch of people are what? Infected, sick, right? And is this normal? No, right? To have a whole bunch of people, right, in a particular area, or in this case worldwide, sick to this high of a number is scary, right? Epidemics are scary. It means that we've got a whole bunch of people sick, much more than we expect to be sick from that disease at that time frame, right? Epidemics don't happen quite as much. We get a lot of what's called outbreaks, right? So confined to a particular community where you have this very large increase in the number of people that are sick. And a lot of times it can be linked to a particular source, right? Whether it be a food source. My lab students almost made me cry yesterday morning. They told me that Bluebell has been contaminated again with listeria. Okay? I've eaten 2 tubs of Bluebell because it was back in the grocery store. And I'm on the last tub, so that's good, because I'm going to, go back to the fake ice cream after that because I've gained too much weight, but I just had to get my Bluebell fix. So this is why I never picked weight loss as a New Year's resolution. I failed day 2. I like to eat stuff I'm not supposed to eat. But listeria, too, the scary thing with that is that pregnant women, it can pass through the uterus, pass through the placenta, and affect the baby. For elderly or immune-compromised individuals, it can go to large numbers in your bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier and cause meningitis. So healthy individuals like myself really shouldn't have much to worry about. The other scary thing for listeria is that it can grow at refrigerator temperatures. I don't know about the freezer level. I haven't done my research on that. But again, we don't purposely want bacteria to be there that we don't want there. So apparently they're, I don't know. I didn't look into it. I was too depressed. So you might want to look into it if you're considering Bluebell ice cream as to what's going on yet again with listeria. Who screwed up this time and where? Modern sanitation, right? So what is the problem with bluebell? It's a sanitation problem, right? But for the most part, you know, the nice thing about living in the times that we live in, for the most part, people know about sanitation. They follow sanitation rules, right? And we don't have to worry about disease from people not doing things cleanly. And we've actually probably become too clean in certain aspects of our lives. Vaccination, right? They didn't have that back in 1918, right? You couldn't go get a flu shot like I did this year, right? Which I know I'll probably see you guys again, because guess who gave me my flu shot this year? One of my past students. She's like, I know you. I can't get away from you guys. I've been teaching too long. I can't go anywhere in this city, including to Ochsner. Forget about it. You all are there. Vaccination, very important, right? And if you haven't gotten your flu shot yet this year, go and get it, because they're saying it's going to hit us hard this month or next month. And what's next month, y'all? You don't want to be sick for Mardi Gras, right? You don't want to be laid up for Mardi Gras. And think about all those people you're going to be exposed to during Mardi Gras. Go get your flu shot now. How long does it take before your flu shot is effective? 7 to 14 days, right? So the minute you get that shot, you're not protected. You got to give your immune system time to make those antibodies to protect you, right? And I think it works this year, because my husband didn't get his, and he's sick as a dog right now, sleeping on the couch, and you know, flu-like symptoms. And I'm like, see, should have got the shot. He's like, well, if I hadn't gone to the hospital last week, I probably wouldn't have gotten it. I'm like, or you could have got your flu shot.
This is kind of a personal question, but I have epilepsy, so the flu shot and I guess epilepsy is not compatible. Right,
yeah. So for some people, there are certain components that are in vaccines that can trigger illnesses like epilepsy. Sorry. Tongue twisting that one. But that's the important thing, too, is that for people who can't get vaccinated, those of us that can, we can help protect. It's called herd immunity, right? So if most of us are vaccinated, the likelihood of us getting it and passing it on to her is less likely, right? We help protect her by ourselves getting vaccinated, those of us that can. Make sense? Pretty soon, as far as school is in against things like measles, mumps, rubella, right, all those ones that we can very easily avoid with vaccination, pretty soon, if your kid goes to public school, the only reason you would get away with not vaccinating your child in a public school system is that if they have a medical condition like epilepsy where they cannot get vaccinated. You can no longer choose, I don't want to do it. Because you put everyone else at risk when you do that. Right? If you're going to be a nurse, you'd be crazy not to, but you're going to have to, right? And keep up with your stuff. When I got my flu vaccine, I made sure that I had my tetanus and diphtheria because I couldn't remember, because you only do that one every 10 years. And they've added in pertussis with that one. Please sign the pad so I know you made it here today. Whooping cough. Right? We've seen a rise in whooping cough, and it can be fatal for infants. So, you know, make sure you keep up with that shot every 10 years. When you're going to the nursing program, you're going to have proof of all of that stuff. Or titers that prove that you've been once vaccinated, where they test your blood to see how many antibodies you have against those different vaccines you have to have. So get those records in order now if you're thinking about applying to nursing school. That's going to help you in the long run. And it's going to help you in our community in general, right, if you do what you need to do to help protect. So the other good news is we do have lots of effective antimicrobials. The bad news is misuse of them, right? Going and taking antibiotics when you actually have the flu. You know, drugs against a bacteria aren't going to affect the flu because the flu is caused by what? A virus, right? Antibiotics don't affect viruses, right? Some antimicrobial, some antiviral drugs out there, yes, right? But most of the drugs that you're taking are going to affect bacteria, right? And they're not going to do anything for you except disrupt your normal bacteria in your body, which then predisposes you to secondary infections. We don't have a magic pill for everything, you guys. Sometimes you just got to lay up on the couch, right? Drink lots of fluids and get rest. Let your body do its job. And that's the wonderful thing about your immune system. It saves your ass when it comes to viruses. It's what saves you, y'all. Unless you've been vaccinated, it is your immune system that saves your butt with viruses. In order for it to work, though, you must feed it, rest it, right? Two most important things when you're sick. The food thing sometimes is difficult. Fluids. Liquid food if you have to. They're not kidding when they say chicken noodle soup. Get something in you. What's the one we worry about today? What's our modern day plague that we don't have vaccination against? AIDS. HIV virus. Human immunodeficiency virus. It attacks your immune system. This is why this one's bad news. The cells that are aimed to protect you, it's destroying. Your helper T cells that we're going to talk about later, your CD4 T cells, it attaches to them, invades them, and kills them, and multiplies in them, and goes and kills more of those cells. So that you get to a point where your immune system becomes deficient. And that's when it's called AIDS. AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, because at one time they didn't know what was causing these symptoms of people being immunocompromised and not being born that way, right? You can be born immunocompromised. It's called the bubble boy, right? The bubble boy doesn't have a very functioning adaptive immune system, right? So therefore, exposure to everyday things that we're exposed to would kill him, right? Hence the bubble. It really exists, y'all. It isn't just a movie. There are people born like that. It's rare, but it happens, and it's sad. So this virus is attacking your immune system. So you don't actually usually die from this virus. You die for the fact that it eliminated your immune system to such a degree that you got a secondary infection and it killed you. Anyone know the number one killer of AIDS patients? What secondary infection gets them? Pneumonia. Pneumonia. Again, you breathe in something. You can't defend. It gets you. We have lots and lots of people nowadays, and we're not going to talk about Magic Johnson, living with HIV. Oh, the newest one is 2.5 Men, yeah. Charlie Sheen. Drug use, I think. And, you know, drug use and other practices that are not conducive to staying healthy. I'm so glad that I am. But you know what? Just because you're in a monogamous relationship does not mean that that other person is doing what they're supposed to do, by the way. It's a whole lot of trust you're putting in someone else's hands. After my first divorce, I went and got tested. Just in case. Right? But they have drugs, lots of drugs out there. Lots of knowledge, right? Early treatment. Of course, if you've got money, you're going to get the best treatment. That's the way the world works, right? But also, Magic Johnson was an elite athlete. I mean, his body was in, like, beautiful conditioning, right? That is better when you get sick, right? Although they say having a little bit of fat is better too, right? If you're anorexic, you're screwed because you have no fat reserves. So if you don't eat, you're going to die, right? All these factors come into play. But, you know, we're really actively working again on vaccination. There's a group of people in Africa who are actually naturally immune to HIV because the receptor that it binds to on the T cells is different enough for them that the virus can't attach and get into their cells. So yeah, that's not something we can harvest and give to everyone else, right? They won the genetic lottery, basically, is what happened there. But very interesting and possible. So who's been paying attention? So these aren't my favorite type of questions. You'll rarely see them on my tests. This is from an old question bank that we used to use, but it's a good example, right, of thinking through a question. So it says, all the following are true with regard to bacteria except. So basically, what do you do with each one of these? You treat it as what? A true and false statement, right? And which one are we looking for? We're looking for the false statement. Does everyone understand that? I hate the way they word these things, right? That's how you got to kind of dissect these. So let's take the first one. Some bacteria are able to use nitrogen gas in the atmosphere and convert it into a form that can be used by plants and animals. True or false? So how many people say true? How many people say false? It's true. It's true. Remember I talked about that, right? The important thing of nitrogen from the atmosphere being put back into the soil to be used by plants and animals. That one's true. I will raise my hand twice, y'all. It was mostly just so that you could know to raise your hand. Okay, so some bacteria can break down materials that no other living organism can degrade. True or false? How many say true? I agree, right? I don't know about you, but I'm not eating oil. Microorganisms kind of the only ones that are doing that. Bacteria can be used to produce useful products that are of commercial value. What do we mean by that? What are they making? Medicines, right? Like insulin, ethanol, right? So what's the answer to this one? Is this one true? Yes. The majority of bacteria are pathogenic and will cause disease if humans are exposed to them. Is this one true? No. Good. You guys have got your good. My son was doing this type of, true and false, even in second grade. And he's like, Mommy, they switched those two words, and that's why it's false. He was able to notice, right, that it was switched. So there's no switch here, but there's a key word here, right? Majority. It's actually the minority would make this true, right? So that's our false statement, and the problem is majority. It should be minority. It feels like the majority, right, considering how destructive they are. But it's actually a small number out of the whole big hole of bacteria that are bad. Few bad apples, right? Ruin the whole thing. Some bacteria, of course this one's going to be true, right? But we'll read it anyways. Some bacteria can be genetically engineered to make medically important products such as insulin and growth hormone. And we know that to be true. So we're going to talk about some explanations, and you need to be able to identify them on the test, as to why emerging diseases are appearing in industrialized countries. So we've got some explaining to do here, because you probably don't even know what emerging is, right? Emerging is something that is increased in incidence in the past 20 years. Well, what's incidence? Incidence is an increase over a specific time period for a specific population, right? So let's look at some examples to help us understand that. So some of the emerging diseases that we're looking at are things like Lyme disease. So Lyme disease, we don't have really here in Louisiana, but it is a big problem in the Northeast where I grew up. It's carried by, anyone know what you have to worry about getting bit by? Ticks. It's a bacterial infection carried by ticks. And so ticks are found on wild animals, right? And as people, as we encroach upon wild animal habitats, right, we come in closer contact with them, and they have less place to live. And this increases our risk. But also, what this does is if we take their home, they've got to go someplace else. So as you look at the incidence and you look at the map of the United States, it's spreading, right? Because the animals are moving, and of course, so are their ticks and the bacteria that cause this infection. So it's increasing as we have this more contact with wild animals, right? And it's even spreading because of us displacing the wild animals. There's been a few cases in Louisiana. A lot of times it's from people traveling elsewhere. I actually had a student last semester. She got Lyme disease when she was went someplace else on a field study. And she's originally from the north, so when she started experiencing the symptoms and stuff like that, her mom's like, I think you have Lyme disease. And so she had to go to her doctor here and tell her doctor, I have Lyme disease. And they had to send off her samples to Tulane's tropical medicine. She's like, this is crazy. I don't have a tropical disease, but they were the only ones handled here that could handle something that we don't normally deal with here, which is Lyme disease. So even in the Northeast, they vaccinate their animals against, but I don't think they have a human vaccine yet for Lyme disease. If caught early, we do have antibiotics will kill the bacteria, but that's the tricky part, is catching this early enough that it doesn't cause damage to the body that we can't repair. So toxic shock syndrome, most women are familiar with that as it relates to what woman product? Tampons, right? Tampons are an absorbative substance that's put into the vagina during menstruation to help absorb the shedding of the lining of the uterus. The only problem with that is that creates a place and a food source for microorganisms to grow. Those microorganisms are in close contact with your body because it's actually in your body, and they can produce toxins that are then absorbed by your body and can cause you to go into shock and die. So all women are taught how to properly use Tampax, right? And if you guys have to teach a young girl one day and you can't handle it, every single box of Tampax has a pamphlet in it that explains all of that to them. So just make sure they read it, because it's serious. It still happens to this day because of lack of education in some instances, right? How to properly use these modern tools that we have, and then can create serious problems. Human immunodeficiency virus, where do they believe this came from? Monkeys, right? And the virus itself mutated to the level that it was able to infect humans, right? So that's one thing that we worry about with viruses too, especially with SARS, right? The changes that it made in an animal population, although we are animals too, but we put ourselves on this pedestal, right? That we can get this crossover to the human population when these genetic changes happen. So let's see if we can identify what each disease these are talking about. So expand of urban areas into rural area settings brings people in closer contact with animals and microbes that cause disease. So which one out of that list did I say this one referred to? Lyme disease and hantavirus. So hantavirus is a virus that's spread by fleas and mice. So the mice, have the fleas. The the virus is transmitted from the mice, in between the mice by the fleas. So the flea poop could have this virus. The mouse's pee and poop could have this virus. So we're seeing an increase in this particular with we store our food, our canned foods and stuff in warehouses, right? If their warehouses are not secure and mice are getting in and they have this virus, they pee and poop on the top of your cans, right? So if you're not going to cook what's inside that can, wash off the top of the can, right? Because you're not seeing this microscopic organism, but it could be there, right? And then you ingest it. Again, it's a virus, so what are you dependent on to survive this? Your immune system. We can support you, right? Try and keep you going while we're praying for your immune system to save your life. So high mortality rate with this one. Pretty scary stuff. Changes occurring in the infectious agent that allow them to infect new hosts. So what were the two I named for this? HIV. One more virus. SARS. Increased travel between continents. What's the one we worry about most? Spreading worldwide. Nah, you need the tick. They don't travel real well. Yeah, Ebola, you could even say. But out of that list, SARS was the one, right, that, we really worry about, that speed of travel that we have nowadays of spreading stuff. And yeah, then we have things like Ebola. And again, the scary thing with Ebola, again, a virus, highly contagious, but the other problem too is, again, very destructive to the body, so much so that your immune system doesn't get it under control before it potentially kills you. Right? Some people survive, but that's not the large majority of people. Right? And there are some people who have survived and they've produced antibodies, and those can be used to treat and help other people. Right? And that's what they were doing at one point. Right? One of the guys that survived, he was donating his serum, his antibodies, to help treat others. Increase in numbers of unvaccinated, therefore susceptible children and adults. So what was the one recently where it may have been linked to improper vaccination outbreak that happened in Disneyland? Measles, right? So, I mean, we have vaccines for these. We've had, outbreaks and serious problems with whooping cough known as pertussis. Measles, mumps, we've had mumps outbreaks. And a large majority of them are linked to people not getting vaccinated. We can prevent these things. And then some people are like, well, we don't have measles here in the United States anymore. Why do we still have to vaccinate our kids? Why do we have to worry about the potential of side effects? Are we the only ones in the United States? We've closed our borders, no one's allowed in? If Donald Trump has his way, maybe so. Right? But that's not the way the world is. And you're allowed to leave too, right? So if you travel somewhere, somebody comes here, they could be bringing it with them. Do you want to be unprotected? Probably not a good idea. So pathogenic microbes, including bacteria, right? That's the one we're most familiar with. We talk about all the time. But don't forget about some fungi can make you really sick. Some yeasts and molds. Protozoa, things like Giardia, amoeba, can make you really sick. Viruses, again, we're pretty familiar with those bad guys. They can damage tissues of the body, right? This leads to the symptoms of disease. They use the human body as a habitat, a home. But they don't just live there, they multiply like crazy. They persist, they stay. Right? They don't just hop on for a free ride and go someplace else, although some of them do that too. But some of them stay behind, right? And they've decided this is home. But again, we don't stay in one spot, right? We don't live in a bubble. So you are a vehicle for transmission to others. The disease symptoms are often offshoots of the body's defense mechanisms. So probably one of the best examples of this is the rashes that we sometimes get with a lot of the viral infections. That rash is actually your immune system killing those virus-infected cells. Right? So that's a product of your immune system, that particular symptom or sign, because you can see that. Symptoms are things you feel, right? You tell the doctor, I have a headache, right? Signs are things we can measure. You've got a temperature, you've got a rash, things we can see, we can measure. Veterinarians only deal in signs, no symptoms. They're no Dr. Dolittle, right? That's only in the movies. Your patients are not going to talk to you. They're not going to say their tummy hurts or their head hurts, right? And you can sometimes assume something hurts, but you'd be amazed. So how do we correctly write a scientific name for an organism? We use what's referred to as the binomial system of nomenclature. So bi means what? Two names, like my son says. They have first and last names like me, right? So they have two names. The first name is the genus name. But unlike us, right, we don't typically refer to organisms as just their first name. Right? And even when we say the species, we say the genus and the species. We basically say their first and last name. The genus name is always capitalized, but the species name is never capitalized. So unlike our names, right, only the first name is capitalized. So I have a t-shirt that we had made when I was at Southeastern for the biology department, because we're the Lions, right? We had written out, and when they printed up the t-shirts, they capitalized the species name for lion. We weren't happy. They wouldn't reprint them. So we used it as a teaching tool. What's wrong on my t-shirt? You have to see the positive in it, right? Commonly, very well-known genus names are abbreviated. So, for instance, E. coli, right? We even refer to it as its abbreviation. It's actually Escherichia coli, which is named after the guy who discovered it, Escherichia, and coli referring to your colon, where it's commonly found. When you're typing, you're always going to italicize. When you're handwriting, you should underline a proper name. And then microorganisms, particularly bacteria, some of them have quite genetic differences from one another, but not so much so that we've designated a whole nother species name for them. But these are what we call strains or some subspecies. And so the most common one you may have heard of is E. coli 0157H7. This is a pathogenic strain of E. coli. If you have this, you wouldn't be here right now. You'd be in the bathroom of the hospital. Causes very severe bloody diarrhea. It actually damages the lining of your intestines. Right? It produces toxins that are found in another pathogenic organism known as Shigella. It's called the Shiga toxin. And we know this particular strain has it, and we have the ability to test. And the 0157 actually has to do with its outer covering that we'll talk about next time. And that's how we're able to know that it has this toxin. So that's the bad news strain of E. coli. So which one of these is correct? Always first and last name, right? C only has the last name. B. Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So pro means before, karyote refers to kernel. What do we mean by the kernel of a cell? The nucleus. So prokaryotes, do they have a nucleus? No. What typically is inside the nucleus? DNA, RNA, protein. Do prokaryotes have DNA, RNA, and protein? All living cells must have those components. It's just not encased in a membrane. Yeah, it's within the cytoplasm and the cytosol. Okay, so it's an organizational distinction here, y'all, with prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Eu meaning true, karyote, a true kernel that you can see within that cell. So prokaryotes, no membrane-bound nucleus, and therefore they don't have any other membrane-bound organization. They have no membrane-bound organelles at all inside their cells. They still have organization, they just don't do it with a membrane. Where eukaryotes, on the other hand, tend to be much larger cells, so that extra level of organization is probably necessary. So they have membrane-bound organelles. They encase their DNA, RNA in membranes, and we refer to that organelle as a nucleus. They have, what are some other membrane-bound organelles that eukaryotes have, like our cells? Mitochondria. Ribosomes, nope. Not an organelle. But important, all cells have ribosomes, even prokaryotes. They make what? What do ribosomes make? Proteins. Proteins. What special organelle do plants have, or algae? Chloroplast, right? Endoplasmic reticulum, do you guys remember that? It's nothing but membranes, right? Lysosomes, Golgi apparatus, right? All this stuff coming back from biology? Yeah. All right. I think I need to look at my cell phone because I'm thinking my regular phone is not. Yeah, okay. We'll do this last one and then we'll stop for today. I was hoping to get through it, but that's okay. I talked too much. All right, so there's 3 domains of life, right? So again, we're just grouping things into groups. What are those three groups? One of them starts with A. Anyone know what it is? Archaea. B. Bacteria. E. Eukarya. And as you can tell by the name eukarya, guess what cell type it is? Eukaryotes, right? That one's a dead giveaway. So all cells, all living organisms are at least a cell. All cells have the ability to reproduce, metabolize, respond. They have a cellular membrane which defines that cell. And they have genetic information. This system of the three domains, and if you studied in school, kingdoms, phylums, you guys remember that classification scheme? This is above kingdoms, right? So I always used to remember, because I can't remember all those levels, right? The mnemonic, Kevin, please close our front gate slowly. That's the classification scheme. So now I've just augmented it a little bit, and now I say, damn, Kevin, close our front gate slowly. D, damn, for domains. Because that's above kingdoms, right? So Carl Rose proposed this in 1977. It took till the late 80s, 90s to make it into textbooks to be widely accepted by the scientific community. So tables are a great way to organize information. You'll see I use them a lot throughout the course, right? So hopefully you filled yours in. So cell type for bacteria. Prokaryote or eukaryote?
Prokaryote.
Prokaryote. Archaea? Prokaryote. Only eukaryote is the eukarya, hence the name of that domain. Cell organization could be unicellular or multicellular. What is it for bacteria? Yeah, and in fact, all prokaryotes are unicellular, so therefore archaea they're prokaryotic, right? So therefore they are unicellular. Eukaryotes, they can be unicellular or multicellular. We're eukaryotic, right? But so are protozoa, which are single-cell organisms. Cell walls containing peptidoglycan. This is a defining characteristic of one domain. Only one group has peptidoglycan in their cell wall. Bacteria. Bacteria is the only yes. That doesn't mean archaea don't have cell walls, y'all. Notice we're talking about peptidoglycan. Membrane-bound organelles is a key defining characteristic of what cell type? Eukaryote. So who's the only yes here? Eukarya. Where can you find bacteria on Earth? Everywhere. Where can you find archaea? Everywhere, but they prefer extreme environments. Where can you find eukaryotes? Yeah, anywhere that's not extreme, right? You won't find us in Antarctica. Right? We don't like the really cold stuff, and the really hot stuff neither, right? You're not going to find us next to hydrothermal vents in the ocean floor. That will stick to archaea and bacteria for that. All right. Have a good, safe weekend. I forget I don't run out of here today. I have my next class. But that's okay. I'm going to use my... everyone who came in late, sign the pad. Or please print. Don't necessarily sign. I need to be able to read the names.